Lama Rod, welcome to the Creation for Liberation podcast. Really honored and excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Amazing. So, jumping right into it, what does liberation feel like for you today? What does it smell like? What does it taste like?
hmm
What does it feel like in your body?
hmm
Yes.
Oh, that's such a beautiful prompt. Um, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is potential. Like, as this abstract experience to begin with, it just feels like there's so much that can happen, right? I don't feel limited
Mm,
or confined, right?
yeah.
But in my body, like I can experience that in terms of a contentment. Like my body isn't longing for something that seems impossible, right? It's longing for the basic necessities, the basic care, right? But it feels content in its longing, right?
Mm,
I don't want to be out of my body, to put it another way, right?
mm,
Um, what does it smell like? Well, that's a really good rose. Rose is one of my favorite scents. And when I smell really beautiful rose, the actual flower, or when I smell distillment of rose, I just think of heaven. This is
mm,
this is what heaven must feel like. Freedom just looks like swirls of pink and lavender and shades and hues of blue. Yeah, and what does it taste like? Sweetness, right?
mm.
The like the sweetest thing that we can taste, but not an overwhelming sweetness, but the sweetness of just complexity and expansion and space and a delightfulness, a loveliness in the taste.
Mm.
Um, and what it sounds like, it just sounds like mm, music, right? Like it's music above my head. Um, just elongated, smooth, melodic tones, right? And it feels as if it's inviting me into this kind of expansion, or rather it's like floating down a river, like a really calm, settled river. It's like a gentle floating, right? And I'm being asked to just kind of let everything go, to surrender everything, right? Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I love it. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling like the fragrance of rose
Mhm.
just in my nostrils. And when you said music above my head, I thought about just like how conversational and songful the birds are right now with
Yeah,
singing,
yeah.
and how nature is reflecting possibility all around right now
hmm
and expansion. So it feels very aligned with the season that we're in, at least here on the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes.
I hearing you talk about contentment and knowing that feeling in my body too, like that, like sheer okayness and acceptance with
Right.
everything that is present for me here in my physical space and also in my awareness of the world. Though I have to say for myself, it's really hard to access that contentment
hmm
when there's so many things that feel wrong,
hmm
right? So there is a difference between the felt sense of liberation
Mhm.
and the cerebral or cognitive idea or abstract of what
Yeah.
it is and what it should
Mhm.
be. But
Mhm.
how do you reckon the two? How do you reckon being content
Mhm.
in such moments of pain and suffering and
Mhm.
crisis?
Mhm. Well, it's the practice of holding the chaos and the crisis instead of the chaos and the crisis holding you, which is what I think many of us are experiencing, right?
Yeah.
And when that chaos, the crisis, and everything that's happening, when it's really gripped you and holding you, then you find yourself in this super overreactive relationship to everything, which makes it difficult to feel at home, stable, planted, rooted, grounded, right? Because you're always adjusting, right, to everything. There's always a reaction, right?
Yeah.
But this is really subtle too, right? Because it's not that we are having a completely different experience when we begin to hold the chaos, right? But when you actually shift the energy or you shift the work where you're saying, you know what, I'm going to hold space for everything that's arising, right? But you're still going to feel it, right?
Mhm.
We're still going to feel the chaos and the tension and the violence. Our hearts will still break. We will still experience frustration and rage and deep disappointment. Absolutely. But when you're holding that, you're also at the same time still connected to the space that's holding everything. And the space is actually holding you as you're holding the chaos that's arising around us, right? That's
Mm.
the only way that I can be in the world now, right? If I am committed to supporting people, helping people, then I have to be practicing holding the chaos, right? Because if it's holding me, then like the result is I will be depleted, right? Overwhelmed, shut down. But also there's the potential in that scenario where I may be actually creating more harm than good because I'm just reacting to everything. And there's no space to get care often, not always, but often into a reaction. You're just reacting and hopefully it's not going to like cause that much damage. And sometimes, it doesn't, and sometimes it does, right? But when you're holding everything, then you have space to respond,
Mm.
even if that response is grieving.
Yeah.
Like I am still choosing to grieve.
Mm. Yeah, there's a choicefulness, there's a consent, there's an intentionality there. I saw something recently on social media about it was a beautiful piece of art of like a little person in a tree with all
Yeah.
these leaves and like eyes looking at the person and like light
Hmm.
shining on them. And
Hmm.
it said to hold ourselves or each other in accountability requires holding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I am not remembering the artist who did this, but I will put it in the show notes. I'll find it and put it in there. Yeah, so this practice of holding feels
Mhm.
really important, not just to be with the chaos, but also to be in accountability. Yeah.
Exactly. Here, like in this space, when we talk about accountability, then it's for me, accountability is how I am showing up and finding myself in relationship to what's arising. So I'm not running away from it. I'm not bypassing it. I'm meeting it,
Hmm.
right? I think that is what first and foremost is expected in terms of freedom and liberation work. Like we have to show up and meet the reality of what's happening and tell the truth, right? And
Hmm.
often the heart of that truth is our own brokenheartedness. But our personal brokenheartedness is just an expression of the collective brokenheartedness, right? The collective disappointment. right? Because this still isn't what we want, right? This isn't what we expected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that deep disappointment, which is an expression of the brokenheartedness, right?
Yes.
But again, so many of us don't feel resourced enough to show up for that brokenheartedness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we think that we're going to get annihilated by that brokenheartedness, which is what I hear
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit working with folks. Everything is too much, right?
Yeah.
And, and again, from my training, right, in meditation and so forth, at this point in my practice, I understand that like everything is just arising out of the nature of my own mind,
Mm.
right? So when people talk about the overwhelming brokenheartedness, I say, well, how does the wave overwhelm the ocean?
Mm.
How does water overwhelm water, right?
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, it's just this, yeah, a statement, this intellectual teaching. Firstly, yes, it's that, but that's how we start training to develop an embodied experience of the nature of our own mind. That this grief, this disappointment, the essence of that is liberated experience. It's emptiness, it's space, it's just energy, right? But it's being shaped by my sense of self and who I think I am. And I am creating a relationship that is really intense, right?
Yeah.
So much of this work, liberation work is actually calling us, all of us, to do practice and work that we maybe didn't think was possible, you
Mm.
know, but it's time to make it possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's time to make it a reality because honestly, we don't have a choice. Well, I mean, we do have a choice. I mean, I always say we don't have a choice. We do. In my practice, I don't have a choice,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I am going to
Mm-hmm.
do this work, period, right?
Mm.
But, if you gave yourself a choice, you can say no, you
Yeah.
know? Then what are the consequences, right?
Lama Rod, when you say you in your practice you don't have a choice,
Yeah,
what do you mean? Like, how's that different than any of us who think whether we think we have a choice or don't have a choice?
yeah.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, when I give myself choices, it's easy for me to bypass everything, the work, and create
Oh,
stories and narratives, right? But the choice, like, there's always a choice,
yeah.
right? But I think we know what the right choice is, but
Yeah.
we just don't want to make it. We
Mm.
just don't want to
Mm.
choose. Of course, the right choice is what is conducive to personal and collective liberation from suffering.
Yeah.
Like, that's the choice. But that choice takes work. Once you
Mm-hmm.
choose it, then there's the work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sort of relating to this in terms of like choosing to be in recovery. Like
Yeah.
there's always a choice of
Mhm.
like, it's I live in California. I could easily just go down the street to the dispensary or whatever. But now
Right, right.
I've made that not a
Yeah,
choice for me. That's no longer
exactly.
a choice because I've chosen
Exactly.
to not make it a choice. And I've chosen
Yes.
instead to commit to clarity and recovery and yeah, the work of that, of
Yeah.
like welcoming all the experiences. So is that relatable? Like, is that kind of what
Oh,
you're
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, you know what the other options are, but you're saying no.
yeah,
Like, you have to, right? You don't even think about it
yeah.
any, anymore. And that's something I learned directly from my teacher who I trained with, who authorized me. It was, I would go to him with all these silly questions and problems, you know? And looking back on it, yes, they were silly, but in the moment they weren't silly. They were just like these life altering,
Human?
decisions.
They're probably human. It's like human shit.
Very human chat. And he would just get so annoyed. And he would just look at me and say, no choice. No
Mm.
choice. That's all he said. No choice. No choice. And then what I
Right.
felt from that transmission was like, oh, I am like making this way difficult, more difficult than it should be. I know what I need to be doing. I just don't want to do it. So I'm trying to go to him to enable,
Yeah.
to give me permission to do
Yeah.
something different. And he was like, no, like I'm not giving you a choice.
Right.
Right? You're not going to use me to get out of this. You know what to do,
Mm.
right?
There's something really juicy there. I mean, we call it boundaries. Like it's a very
Mm-hmm,
strong boundary. It
mm-hmm,
reminds me of my brother Prashay, who is like so
mm,
disciplined when it comes
right.
to his like evening routine. Like
Yep.
he'll have dinner, he'll eat an apple, and then he'll brush his teeth. And then
Yeah.
he's not snacking, he's not doing
Yeah.
anything after that because he's given that's like his no choice. I'm
Yeah.
brushing my teeth, so I no longer have a choice to, and my kryptonite is snacking at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just been like
Hmm.
where it's been going recently, and it doesn't make me feel good in the morning. So this is just landing in a really interesting way of no choice is not disempowerment or restriction in a oppressive way. It's actually conducive for liberation. It's like
Yeah.
that push and pull yin and yang of like flow and discipline
Yeah.
being in the mix.
Yeah. It's and the balance. Yes, absolutely. Exactly what you've expressed is the balance of all of this, right? Because the choice to get free, whatever that looks like in the moment, right? It may seem really rigid. Sometimes it feels like trying to like stuff yourself through this really small opening, right?
Yeah.
But on the other side of that opening is space, right?
Hmm.
So can we constrict and get rigid and struggle for a little bit in order to emerge into space on the other side, right? And that's what I attune myself to. Like when I'm making hard choices, I say, well, this has to happen because that's how I'm going to get to that space or that freedom on the other side.
Can you share a
Mhm.
way in which feels perhaps current for you,
Mhm.
where you are in the experience of like fitting yourself in a smaller hole, trusting that on the other side, if you will, there's open space?
Mhm. I mean, I think that is like that just really describes like my whole life, like not just one particular like everything. Every day I wake up and say, you know what, this is what I need to do. This is how I have to spend my time. Like this is how I have to set boundaries, right? Because I am trying to protect my energy. I'm trying to heal, right? I'm trying to be resourced enough to support others who need to see me, or need to experience, the medicine that I'm offering, right? So part of the choices that I've been making, I guess, in the past couple of years is just moving. I moved from Boston back to Georgia,
Mhm.
which is where I'm from, here in Atlanta. And I was like, I have to do this. Like, there's no choice, right? For many reasons, right? And I know that on the other side of this move is going to be a kind of stability, which will actually blossom a lot of space that I've been longing for to be
Mhm.
back on what really feels like homeland, you know.
Mm.
Um, but again, like these are choices that I'm making like every day. Who I'm, just how I'm divesting from certain relationships and reinvesting in other kinds of relationships. What I am choosing to refrain from, you know, and what I'm choosing to be more in relationship with.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
it's like a pressure cooker or a smart pot, that like you get pressurized, right? You go through this period where it's just really the pressure is really intense because it's shaping you
Mhm.
into something else. It's moving you through something that pressure has to be intense, you know. And we choose those experiences, which are deeply uncomfortable, but it's that discomfort that's actually like molding us or smoothing us out in order to reemerge into something much more fluid and spacious. Oh, like a crucible. That's what I was trying to say. A crucible, like it's just like the intensity of that transformation, of the
Mm,
heat and the pressure, that alchemy,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like alchemy is just really uncomfortable. It just is, right? Because so much of that discomfort is you like having to deal with your deep, intense fixations,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And
That's so
you're just,
real.
yeah, because you're just being pulled from it, and it's just like you're being pulled because you just won't let go because it's like, I have to hold on,
Yeah.
and this is why I often talk about surrendering,
Hmm.
learning how to let go. Cause I'm like, I just don't, I don't feel like struggling all the time. So I'm just going to like let go. This is
Mm.
like at the very beginning, you
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
am surrendering. I don't want to like be torn apart,
Yeah.
trying to get this to happen, right? The
Yeah.
wisdom of surrender, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I think about I've been reflecting a lot on seed and seed process, especially at
Mm,
this time, and like
mhm.
have just been reflecting too about a seed and the alchemy that happens with a seed and the like struggle of like cracking open and like morphing into something
Yeah.
completely different, pushing through like yeah, just what a process that is
Hmm.
of alchemy and struggle that is so natural and organic and necessary. That requires a lot of surrender. The seed
Yeah.
isn't like holding on to its skin that kept it small. It's like letting it
Hmm.
go so there's more growth and expansion. So speaking of surrender, uh,
Hmm.
the part of, or one of the many parts in your book, The New Saints, which I
Hmm.
listen to on Audible, which you narrate. So for those of you listening, I recommend it if you're like soothed by Lama Rod's voice. Um, but towards the end, you talk about surrendering to the dark. I think we use light and dark in many different ways, but what do you
Hmm.
mean? What do you mean by
Hmm. For me, darkness is anywhere my awareness isn't,
mm,
you know, it's just anywhere that feels unclear, right? And then because of that lack of clarity, there's a narrative
mm,
about danger, right? And caution. And those narratives shift and change or go away or what have you, depending on my proximity to that clarity or the ways in which I'm actually able to develop clarity about what has been unclear previously.
I appreciate how you have shared across different spaces and places, writing, speaking about your relationship to depression and how has learning or surrendering to
Mhm.
the dark, to this space that isn't within the realm of your awareness, influenced or impacted your relationship to depression?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, my depression was very energetic, right? Not so much biochemical, which was a different experience for me, but surrendering to my experience of depression as this, deeply energetic experience, like that surrendering helped me to get close to it, right? It helped me to get into it, to actually see what it was and what it needed,
Mm,
right? Because the darkness is asking to be tended to,
yeah.
right? And I want to offer deep care to the things that maybe I'm afraid of, I run away from, the things maybe that have historically been the source of suffering for me, right? And I had to learn early in my practice that, like, I had to ask the things that I was terrified of what it needed
Mm,
instead of
mhm.
just believing that these things were just trying to get me because for whatever reason, right? No,
Right.
the darkness needs something,
Mm, mhm, mhm. Yeah,
right? And I had to develop the courage to ask what the darkness, or in my case, the depression that I was going through, what do you need?
yeah.
What can I do? Like,
Mm, yeah. It goes back to what you were saying earlier around how you hear this, and I hear it too, this
Yeah,
fear that so many folks have, myself included at times, of like being totally overtaken
yeah,
by the grief or by the
yeah,
depression or by the rage, such that it's like, no, I'd rather just not go there. And I just keep
yeah,
pressing it down and pressing it down
yeah,
until I don't have there, until there's no choice.
yeah.
And the darkness or
Mhm.
the grief is just like, nope, bitch, we're taking over. It's our time, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's when like, in those experiences we just keep packing things like, so intensely it becomes pressurized.
Yes.
I used to use the junk closet, that many people have in their homes where everything just gets shoved in. I don't know where this thing goes. I'm just gonna put it, in here. And then it gets full and full and full, like until the door can't close, until everything just falls out of it. And that's the way the darkness operates. It's like the more I run away, the more strength it gathers and gains. And that becomes all kinds of compounded experiences for people that we've described in, Western, psychology and different spiritual traditions and so forth, the shadow, what have you, that's the language that we use. But like at some point you have to be like, you know what, I need to organize this closet.
Mm.
you know, I have got to get rid of things. I've got to organize, but like that willingness to do that's when freedom starts to happen,
Mm.
right? When you say, it's time for me to tend
Mm.
to everything I've thrown in here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I've been in contemplation with this way that depression can be a portal to,
Yes.
yeah, to like
Yeah.
liberation, to
Yeah.
love, to
Yeah.
passion. And I'm really
Mm-hmm.
hearing that too, and what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, that if we
Yeah.
sit down and ask, what are you here for? What do you need?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, the responses that we receive can be so expansive.
Yeah. And we understand that we're not the only ones, right? So tending to that darkness actually softens our hearts. Like it makes us more, empathetic to others, right? And it really reduces the isolation. I am not the only one experiencing this. There are many people going through this at this moment,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that's already a taste of freedom right there because the space just opens, the sense of I is slightly displaced from the center, and all of a sudden, like you feel like you belong,
Mm.
you know?
Hmm. It really hit, Lama Rod, when you
Hmm.
said that we can't really love something that we're afraid of,
Hmm.
whether it be God or
Yeah,
a perceived enemy, or even
yeah,
perhaps a current oppressor or
yeah,
depression. Like,
yeah,
so yeah, even
yeah,
this conversation about like being afraid of our feelings, like how can we
yeah,
really love ourselves if we're
mhm,
so afraid of our sadness
yeah,
or our rage?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, can you say more about that love?
Hmm. This is like the hardest of these teachings here. This is,
It's so human to
um,
feel afraid.
yeah. I mean, I have these conversations often, when I'm teaching and supporting folks, right? How do you love the thing that you're terrified of? How do you love the person who's hurt you the most? Right?
Mhm.
This is extremely high level practice. So like you just don't start there, and you just don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to love the person who's hurt me the most, and that's not realistic, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I like to start with differentiating between liking and loving, which is going to make it a little easier. Right? Because for me, it's like I don't have to like you to love you. And when I talk about love, what I'm talking about is like I want you to be free. I want you to be resourced. I want you to be safe,
Mm.
right? I want you to have what you need, all of that, right? But I don't have to be your friend for that
Mm.
to happen. I don't, nor do I all right, well, nor can I actually get in the way of you getting what you need as well. Like
Mm.
those are my boundaries around this. Like I'm not gonna be your like you're I have all kinds of names for people that I don't like. So, but like I don't like you, right? But I still want you to be free. Because if you were free and resourced, then maybe you wouldn't be expressing the kinds of harm and violence that you're expressing right now.
Yeah,
Right. If you were actually happy,
yeah.
right, who would you be? How would our relationship be different? Right. As an individual and also a part of a collective. If this collective, this group of people were really getting what they need, really getting resource, would they be doing what they're doing to
Mm.
others? And I just want people to start there. Like just start that as a contemplation.
Yeah.
How people would be different if they were actually experiencing spaciousness and resourcefulness and all of that. If they were actually safe, if they were actually able to tend to the trauma instead of the trauma tending to them,
Mm.
right? And actually creating situations where they're reacting in ways that are violent towards
Mm.
others. Like,
Mhm.
how would they be different if
Mhm.
those conditions were different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
You
I'm
know,
thinking about like at a personal inner relating level to love, say, my rage or my depression or my grief or my disgust or my jealousy or my envy is to say, I want you to be free and I don't
yeah,
have to like the experience of you being
yeah,
with me. Like
right,
there's that.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then interpersonally in relationship to people who annoy me or their way of being just like rubs me or irks me. And it's like, I still want you to be free. And I'm not bad if I don't like you. And
Yeah,
it's like, I don't have to like you and you don't have to like
yeah,
me,
yeah, exactly.
but I could still want you to be free
Yeah,
and want your
yeah,
needs to be taken care of and want you to
yeah,
be feeling safe. Yeah.
yeah,
And then
absolutely.
yeah, like imagining, people like Netanyahu being
Mm,
free and loving Netanyahu into freedom or like wanting that
mm,
for him and how that would
mm-hmm.
impact so many people,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah,
Yeah, that just
yeah,
this perspective just gives a lot of space for
yeah,
like humanity in me is what
yeah,
I sense.
yeah.
And also speaks to like a much deeper truth that is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't want even the worst person to not be free.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone deserves to be free,
Yeah.
which is another thing, aspiration we train in. Everything, everyone, every being deserves to be free, not just the ones that I like, not just the ones that I love, not just the ones who are, good,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone deserves to be free, right? And I think back to, the 2016 elections when Trump, was elected and everyone was so radicalized overnight, and and I was, teaching workshops for people who were, getting into activism for the first time, trying to help people ground in contemplative practice and meditation before they head off into the streets, trying to burn things down. And, and people would come to me and they would say, I'm trying to love Donald Trump. And I would be like, what's wrong with you? Well, what are you doing? You'll never do that. That's not going to happen as like again, people, they're just like, I just want to get through the anger and get to the love and the forgiveness. I was like, you haven't dealt with the anger yet. Trying to love this person, you haven't actually done this care for yourself, right? And so I mentioned that, just to point out, and that was also, what started, Love and Rage as a book, was really answering that question for folks. But I'd share that because, so much of this work is actually saying, you know what, I can love you and actually be really pissed off with you at the same time. And
Mm.
both of those can happen. And I think we try to force one or the other. It's like I'm just going to be pissed off and nothing else, or I'm just going to love you and nothing else. It could be both. I can be really disappointed and frustrated with you and still say, and you deserve to be free as well. right? That doesn't mean maybe that initially you're going to be helping to get them free, but like it's starting an aspiration, and the aspiration or an aspiration in general is the root of any liberatory action,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I see this also creating so much less personalization over the feelings that just are there. Like if I'm holding simultaneously, I really want you to be free and I'm fucking pissed at you. Like I can
Mhm.
take that anger less personally and let it be at the table and move
Yeah,
how it wants to move without it
yeah,
overtaking, again,
yeah,
without that chaos holding
yeah,
me. Or, yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the love. The love is what holds the space. You know, as I often talk about, anger can be like this wildfire, but the love is what sets the boundaries for keeping that wildfire from spreading and consuming everything. You know, it's the water, it's the moisture that sets the boundaries that keep that fire contained, right? But
Mm.
not repressed, but it creates a boundary that keeps the anger from spilling over into situations where that anger isn't has nothing to do with. But the love essentially is the clarity. It's the space that I have to respond, to make conscious decisions about how to reduce harm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your love of someone, who's created a lot of harm, you may not be actively helping them get free or resource, but you're also at the same time reducing the ways in which you may create more harm for them,
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah.
a reaction to your deep disappointment beneath the anger.
Yeah, there's something there around like just the importance of and the permission sometimes of recognizing that I could still love you and want you to be free and I don't have to be the one helping
Yeah,
you necessarily at this point in
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're helping by staying out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, like we have to
Right.
recognize
Right.
like where we're at and understand that like whatever we're doing based in love is something positive,
Mm-hmm.
even if it
Right.
doesn't look active.
Yes. Even if it's not like direct in contact, it could be from a
Yeah,
distance and
yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. At the beginning of the new saints, you were talking about
Hmm.
the apocalypse.
Uh-huh.
And you just kept going back and back and back. And I was like, oh snap. The apocalypse has been here forever, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I just appreciated that because yeah, it's for me in my lifetime, it's easy to suddenly be conscious of some sense of apocalypse or like deep unveiling um since 2020 or since
Hmm.
even since Donald Trump was elected.
Hmm.
But it goes back more. Can you talk more
Yeah,
about that?
absolutely. When I was thinking about that, thinking about like apocalypse, and I was like, oh, so many of us start the apocalypse at our disruption, at our
Mhm.
community's disruption, right? And then you start thinking, wait, there have been many communities in civilization that have experienced apocalypse. That like I think that the emergence of technology, particularly social media, makes everything much more like um just knowable, but there's been so much happening for thousands of years, right? But at this moment it feels as if we know too much now, and because of that, I've often lately been saying not only is this an age of apocalypse, this is also an age of decolonization, right? Because
Yeah.
we've built up to this moment and we have the technology, we have the research, we have experiences that say, you know what, maybe this whole colonization project needs to end. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe we should start really dealing with the wounds and inflicted by colonialism,
Yeah.
colonization, right? And that's what we're getting hip to,
Yeah.
and so this apocalypse, yes, means unveiling, but that unveiling is telling us the truth about what we need to do to start healing, right? Which brings into the picture, right, abolition, right? It's like it's time to start abolishing, right? Like the systems that no longer work, that actually the systems that perpetuate the violence,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, your take on just the disruption of communities for
Hmm.
ages, centuries, being
Hmm.
apocalypse just sort of allows me and hopefully folks who are listening, like an opportunity to zoom out beyond the confines of one's life.
Hmm.
And it roots in more of a collectivist, global, um, humanity-based framework.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think so much of what I feel today's pain and suffering comes from, especially here in what's known as the United States, is
Hmm.
an individualism that can feel so narrow
Hmm.
that produces
Hmm.
senses of isolation or
Yep.
aloneness or
Yep.
separation. And
Yep.
cultures of separation feel so much part of colonialism.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because like to separate people is to control them,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And this is why decolonization is really about community.
This is what we've spoken about around loving people without necessarily having to
Mhm.
like them or um, being willing to meet the reality and telling the truth without succumbing to the fear of it overtaking in a way that feels incapacitating and being willing to
Mhm.
hold chaos. All of this feels like medicine when it comes to doing the work in community for decolonization. Yeah, is there anything more you want to share about what decolonization means to you?
Mhm. Mhm.
That
You
could
know,
be
it's
another episode.
yeah, like it's just for me, and this is what we've been really getting into the heart of in this conversation, is that this is all, yes, very collective, very historical, but also very personal,
Yeah.
right? And so much of this labor is us as individuals having to name the pain, having to name not just our pain, but the pain of our ancestors, the pain of the land, right, of the natural world, the pain of, not, and also the pain of our collective as well. But first and foremost, we have to get to our experience of pain, right? Because that's where the freedom really starts, right? Until we're able to do that, we won't actually get to the truth of how to, in a real sense, abolish and heal, how these systems are working personally within us,
Hmm.
right? And that's hard work. Like you have to go back to the root of the trauma. And so, in a way, what that means is that we all have to remember who we were before these systems, because that experience of who we are is still alive, but we have to go back and find it,
Mm.
right? Who we were before these systems, right? And it's
Mhm.
such, I mean, that's such a profound journey, right? And so much of that journey is really about grieving. Like we have to grieve our way back. We have to
Mm.
grieve on behalf of our ancestors who created these systems, perhaps, and grieve for our ancestors who were lost in these systems. Like we have to do this grieving and return back, right? And this is in this nation, this land, this United States. It's that's the great activism of the future. That's the collective work. We have to start grieving, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's only going to be those of us who are ready for the work. So not everyone is ready for this, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It has to be okay.
Yeah. When you were talking about remembering who we are before the systems, I thought about something I recently learned about the heart as an organ.
Hmm.
Oh, about half of the cells in our heart remain the same from birth to death,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
the other half slowly over time regenerates, dies off, and recreates itself. And when I learned that, I felt like my little baby child heart, like so open and so unwounded and so
Hmm.
just like free. The love is so was and is to some degree so free to be
Hmm.
given and to receive. And I also thought of heart when you were talking about rose in the beginning as
Mm. Yeah.
what liberation smells like. And I'm coming into like a really felt sense of like how important my heart is in this work, in liberation work,
Hmm.
and like unwounding my heart so that I can be in community more
Hmm.
presently and honestly and bravely and courageously,
Yeah.
and remembering like my heart beneath, yeah, all the isms that I've learned and been conditioned in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I really appreciate that. Um, Speaking of the heart, how's your heart now? Is there anything else you want to speak on behalf of your heart before we close?
No, no, just to say how beautiful this conversation has been, and I hope it is medicine for anyone, who listens.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. It's
Mhm.
been medicine for me, so I trust it will be medicine for many folks. So thank you so much.